Think about Harvard, and you likely conjure images of academic excellence, prestigious halls, and intellectual rigor. However, beneath the surface of this esteemed institution lies a troubling reality that many may find shocking. Racism. Yes, even at Harvard, a bastion of higher learning, racial discrimination rears its ugly head, staining the reputation of an institution once hailed as a beacon of progress. Recent incidents and revelations have shed light on the pervasive nature of racism within Harvard's walls. From discriminatory admissions practices to microaggressions in the classroom, students of color face myriad challenges that their white counterparts may never comprehend. One particularly egregious example is the case of a black student who endured relentless taunts and threats from fellow classmates, culminating in a violent altercation during a cooking competition. The student, initially eager to showcase his culinary skills, found himself subjected to racial slurs and even physical harm at the hands of his peers. Such incidents not only highlight the toxic culture of racism that persists at Harvard, but also the failure of the institution to adequately address and rectify these issues. Before we continue, kindly endeavor to hit that like button as a way of supporting our work. Share with your families and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and subscribe to Stay Put for more while you help in building the rising subscribers of this channel. We appreciate your support. Harvard, the epitome of prestige and intellect, was not the utopia it appeared to be in the glossy brochures and on the covers of magazines. No, beneath its ivy-covered walls and hallowed halls, there simmered a cauldron of prejudice and discrimination, waiting to consume those vulnerable to its toxic influence. And unfortunately, I was one of its victims. It all started when my professor announced that our class would be participating in a cooking competition for black poor people in the nearby slump. The aim of the competition was to raise awareness and funds for the less fortunate in our community. I scoffed at the idea, thinking it was just another attempt by my white classmates to pity and show off their savior status. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake off the thought of the cooking competition. It was a chance for me to show my skills and prove that I was more than just a black man. So, against my better judgment, I signed up for the competition. The day of the competition arrived, and as expected, my classmates were not thrilled to be there. They whispered and snickered as we were assigned our groups. I was the last cake to pick, and was eventually put in a group with all white students. They had initially avoided me, but now they were forced to work with me. Our task was to cook a full meal for the attendees, including burgers, fish tacos, salad, and fries. My team assigned me the hardest part, the fries. I knew they were trying to sabotage me, but I refused to back down. I was determined to prove to them that I was capable of handling any challenge. As we were cooking, one of my teammates made a comment that would change the course of the competition. Why did we have to cook for those *********? The words stung, and I felt a surge of anger and hurt. As the competition progressed, tensions simmered beneath the surface, boiling over at the slightest provocation. Every mistake, every misstep was met with criticism and scorn, thinly veiled behind smiles and polite words. I felt like an outsider in my own team, unwelcome and unwanted. However, things took a violent turn when one of my teammates used a knife to cut my finger while I was slicing potatoes. I could feel the blood oozing out, mixing with the potatoes on the cutting board. The kitchen fell silent as everyone froze, stunned by the sudden escalation. I glanced around, searching for a hint of remorse or even shock on my teammates' faces, but all I found was indifference and hostility. It was as if the ugliness of their words had manifested into physical violence before my very eyes. In that moment, I realized that the competition wasn't just about showcasing our culinary skills. It was a battleground of prejudices and deep-seated biases. My identity, my worth as a person, had been reduced to the color of my skin, and now, to the blood dripping from my wounded finger. The pain radiating from my hand paled in comparison to the ache in my heart. How could people harbor such hatred towards others, based on something as arbitrary as race? With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed aside the pain and fear, my instincts kicking in as I confronted him. Anger flared within me, a fierce determination to not let this act of violence go unchecked. I locked eyes with him. "You think you can intimidate me with your cowardly actions?" I spat out, my voice trembling with fury. "You're the one who's afraid of anyone who doesn't fit into your narrow-minded view of the world." My words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. The tension in the kitchen was palpable, the other contestants watching with bated breath, unsure of what would happen next. But I refused to back down. refused to let fear dictate my actions. His grip on the knife tightened, his knuckles turning white with rage. But before he could react, I took a step forward, my gaze never wavering. "Go ahead, do your worst," I challenged, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hand. "But know that I won't be silenced. I won't be cowed into submission by the likes of you." His eyes flickered with uncertainty, caught off guard by my defiance. With a guttural growl, he lunged forward, the knife gleaming in his hand. Instinct kicked in, and I dodged to the side just in time, feeling the rush of air as the blade narrowly missed my shoulder. "Stop this madness!" someone shouted from the sidelines, their voice cutting through the turmoil of the kitchen. It was our professor, his face a mask of shock and dismay as he rushed forward to intervene. His presence seemed to momentarily halt the violence, as both of us, locked in a tense standoff. Amidst the fear and tension, there was a glimmer of hope as our professor stepped forward, his authoritative presence commanding attention. "Enough," he declared, his voice firm and unwavering. "This ends now." His words seemed to break the spell that had gripped us, and slowly, hesitantly, the assailant lowered the knife, his eyes darting around the room as if seeking approval or escape. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with uncertainty and apprehension. As he led me away from the group, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude towards him. Despite the chaos of the situation, he had remained calm and collected, diffusing the tension with his authoritative presence. Once my finger was bandaged and the initial shock had worn off, the professor sat me down for a private conversation. He listened intently as I recounted the events leading up to the confrontation, his expression growing increasingly somber with each word. "No, I'm truly sorry you had to experience something like this," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "It's clear that we have a lot of work to do in addressing issues of racism and discrimination on campus." As the chaos subsided, our professor declared to the group, "I won't tolerate this kind of behavior," he stated firmly, his gaze sweeping over each of us in turn. "We are here to learn, to grow, and to support one another, regardless of our differences." There was a glimmer of hope, a ray of light shining through the darkness. With the professor's guidance, we patched up my wounded finger as best as we could, the makeshift bandage serving as a tangible reminder of the scars we carried, both seen and unseen. And then, with a renewed sense of purpose, we returned to our cooking stations, determined to finish what we had started. As the time ran out, the judges called for the teams to step away from their stations and gather at the front of the stage. The tension in the air was palpable as we waited for the verdict. "The competition was tough this year, and each team has truly presented some remarkable dishes," the head judge announced. "But there can only be one winner." My heart was pounding as I held my breath, waiting for the name of the winning team to be announced. And then, finally, the verdict was revealed. Our team had emerged victorious. A wave of relief and joy washed over me, and I couldn't help but let out a loud cheer. Tears of happiness streamed down my face as our team was congratulated and awarded the grand prize. It was a moment of pure bliss, knowing that all our hard work and perseverance had paid off. But more than just winning a cooking competition, this victory was about so much more. It was about proving to everyone that unity and solidarity were more powerful than hate and bigotry. In that moment, I felt a sense of pride in myself and my team. We had shown the world that our differences didn't define us, but instead made us stronger. As we stood on the stage, our hands raised in triumph, I couldn't help but reflect on my journey to this moment. Growing up, I had faced my fair share of discrimination and prejudice, being from a mixed background. It had always been a constant battle to prove myself and break free from the stereotypes that society had set for me. But through this cooking competition, I had found my voice and my strength. I had refused to let anyone else define me, and instead, I had used my passion for cooking to bring people together. And in doing so, I had gained a new understanding of my own identity. As we celebrated our victory, I couldn't help but notice something happening around us. The walls that had once divided people were slowly starting to crumble. The other teams were coming up to us, congratulating us and complimenting our dishes. The barriers that had held us back were being replaced by a newfound sense of unity and understanding. As we handed out plates of food, I felt a sense of connection with the people we were serving. Despite our differences in background and circumstance, we were united by a common humanity, bound together by our shared experiences of struggle and perseverance. When I looked into their eyes, I saw reflections of myself, a reminder that we are all just human, and we all have our own struggles. Among the crowd, I spotted a young woman who stood out to me. She was no older than 25, with bright blue eyes that shone with a hint of sadness. She wore a tattered coat that barely kept out the chilly evening air, and her hands were shaking as she reached for the plate of food I offered her. As she sat down, I couldn't help but feel drawn to her. "Hi, can I join you?" I asked, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. She looked up at me with surprise but nodded her head. "Sure, I guess," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a seat and introduced myself. She told me her name was Lily, and I could sense that she was hesitant to open up. But something about her drew me in, and I found myself telling her my own story, how I had struggled with poverty in my early years, but through hard work and perseverance, I had made it Harvard. Lily listened attentively, her eyes widening in amazement as I spoke. I could see the hope and inspiration growing in her, and I knew that my story had resonated with her on some level. Before I knew it, we were joined by a few other volunteers who had finished their tasks in the kitchen. Over a bowl of warm soup, we shared stories and laughs, and I could see Lily's spirit begin to lift. As we finished our meals, I turned to her and said, "You know, we're always looking for more volunteers here. If you ever need a place to go or just want to lend a hand, we'd love to have you." A smile slowly spread across Lily's face, lighting up her features. "Really? That would be amazing," she said. We exchanged numbers and I promised to keep in touch. As she left the community center, I felt a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. For once, I felt like I had truly made a difference in someone's life. In the following weeks, I saw a change in the dynamics of the community. People were more open and accepting of each other, and it was a beautiful sight to see. Our victory had not only brought us together as a team, but it had also united the community. Racism is a scourge that has plagued societies for centuries, and unfortunately, it is not a phenomenon confined to history books or distant lands. In the United States, racism continues to rear its ugly head in various forms, including within the competitive arenas of everyday life. In every competition, whether it's in the realm of sports, academia, or even something as seemingly innocuous as a cooking contest, the insidious influence of racism can be felt. It manifests itself in subtle biases, unfair judgments, and outright acts of discrimination, perpetuating a cycle of inequality and injustice. Take, for example, the world of sports. Despite the strides made towards racial equality in recent decades, athletes of color continue to face discrimination and prejudice on and off the field. From derogatory slurs hurled from the stands to unequal opportunities for advancement, the specter of racism looms large, casting a shadow over the achievements of talented individuals. In academic competitions, the story is much the same. Students of color often find themselves marginalized and overlooked, their accomplishments diminished by the pervasive belief that they are somehow less capable than their white counterparts. Whether it's through implicit bias in grading or overt acts of racism from fellow competitors, the road to success is fraught with obstacles for those who do not conform to society's narrow standards of acceptability. Even in something as seemingly benign as a cooking competition, racism can rear its ugly head. The story recounted earlier of a black contestant facing discrimination and violence at the hands of his white teammates is unfortunately all too familiar. The kitchen, like many other spaces, can become a battleground of prejudices and stereotypes, with individuals judged not on the merits of their culinary skills, but on the color of their skin. And in talent shows and performance competitions, individuals of color are often relegated to stereotypical roles and caricatures, their talents and abilities overshadowed by harmful stereotypes and preconceptions. From tokenism to cultural appropriation, contestants of color are often forced to navigate a complex web of racial biases and prejudices that undermine their chances of success. But perhaps what is most insidious about racism in competitions is the way it perpetuates a cycle of inequality and exclusion. When individuals are denied opportunities based on their race, it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, reinforcing the belief that people of color are somehow inherently inferior. This, in turn, perpetuates the systemic racism that pervades every aspect of society, from education to employment to the criminal justice system. So how do we break this cycle? How do we create a more equitable and just society where everyone, regardless of race or background, has an equal opportunity to succeed? The answer lies in challenging our own biases, speaking out against injustice, and actively working towards dismantling the structures of oppression that uphold racism. In competitions, This means holding organizers and participants accountable for their actions, implementing anti-racism training, and creating spaces that are inclusive and welcoming to people of all races and backgrounds. It means amplifying the voices of those who have been marginalized and ensuring that their experiences are heard and valued. But beyond competitions, it also means advocating for systemic change in all areas of society. It means fighting for policies that address racial disparities in education, healthcare, housing, and employment. It means supporting initiatives that promote diversity and inclusion and working towards a future where race no longer determines one's opportunities or outcomes. Ultimately, the fight against racism is a collective one, requiring the commitment and dedication of individuals, communities, and institutions alike. It won't be easy, and progress may be slow, but it is a fight worth fighting. For until we address the root causes of racism and inequality, we cannot truly claim to live in a society that is just and equitable for all.